5. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Church of Grace. My name is Patrick Hayes, and today is Friday, June 20th. And tonight we are in our study of the book of Matthew. We are in Matthew part 57. Yes, it has taken us over a year to get through the book of Matthew. And tonight we're going to talk about the 6 trials of Jesus. Now, what I wrote down, it says here, we will be finishing up Matthew chapter 26. That might be a lie. That is the goal, possibly an ambitious one. Before we start reading Matthew chapter 26, I should make you aware of something. So let's go to the slides. And to answer your question, Greg, yes, I will email this one to you. So here we have not quite the last week of the life of Jesus, okay, but he has that on the 12th day. Then Jesus sits in the house of Simon the leper, also on the 12th day, and this is where Mary pours the expensive ointment on Jesus, and Judas gets upset about that. After this, also on the 12th day, is when we have the betrayal of Jesus by Judas, and that is when Judas met with the chief priests, and he made a covenant with them for 30 pieces of silver to betray Jesus. And at this point, Judas is just looking for the opportunity. And the chief priests explained to Judas, we don't want to take him on the feast day. Didn't work out for them, but the feast day he's talking about is the 14th day of the first month, which is Passover, as you can see here. And then the 15th day starts the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is a 7-day feast. After sundown, well, you know what? Hold on. There's one more thing. On the 13th day, this is when the disciples go and they get the upper room and they prepare the meal for the Last Supper. And here, so these red lines right here and right here, that is sundown. That's sundown on the 13th, sundown on the 14th. Because remember, in the Bible day, the day starts at sundown. Our day starts at midnight. That's what we're used to. The Bible calendar, the day starts at sundown. So they prepare for the Last Supper sometime on the 13th. And then they have the last meal. If you weren't here when I explained all that, we went over that the last 2 weeks. You can watch the videos on our website or on our app. And they have the Last Supper sometime before sundown on the 13th. Then after sundown, after the Lord's Supper, Jesus and the disciples walk to Mount Olivet, and they get together in the Garden of Gethsemane sometime after sundown on the 13th. And that is where we're going to pick it up in Matthew chapter 26. Now, we went over part of the Garden of Gethsemane last week, and we're going to go over the tail end of it tonight. By verse 56 of Matthew chapter 26, Jesus has been taken away, and the disciples flee. What you should know is that while they were in the upper room, so after Judas Iscariot left, after sundown, but before they went to the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus gives his longest recorded discourse in the Bible that he personally gave while here on earth. Jesus gave several long discourses or speeches, if you will. The one that we're most familiar with is found in Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount. The longest one is his upper room discourse, but it is not recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. It is written in John, starting in chapter 13, verse 31, and it continues all the way through John chapter 17, verse 26. At the end of that, in John chapter 18, verse 1, we read that they crossed over the brook in the valley of Kidron and entered the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, I say all that to say this. There is a great deal of teaching from the mouth of Jesus that you need to read in order to get the full picture. But it is not recorded in the book of Matthew. So we are not going to cover all of that here. Any questions? Greg clearly just said any questions so I could drink coffee. All right, read the room, my man. Go ahead. Since you stopped us, what do you got? The 15th starts the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Yep, week-long feast. Very good. Good question. Yes, Pam? So Nisan corresponds to April, May. Yeah, so it's springtime. But you got to remember, let me ask you this, folks. When does the Bible calendar reset? Remember, it has nothing to do with the Gregorian calendar. We use the Gregorian calendar. It has nothing to do with the Gregorian calendar. What's that? No. When does the month reset? Dave? Who? With the new moon, not the full moon. Good guess. Okay, with the new moon. So remember, there were watchmen on the walls of Jerusalem, and they had many jobs, but one of their jobs was to wait and see when that first teeny tiny itty bittiest little sliver of the moon showed up. And they would identify it, and then they would have to get that confirmed, and that started the month. And the lunar cycle is how long? I think it's 20, I thought it was 29 and a half, or it's 28 and a half. It's not a helpful number. It's not an even number. Either way, it doesn't matter. We're very close. The point is, that's when the month would reset. But it has nothing to do with the Gregorian calendar. But you can very easily look up a Bible calendar online, just like you can buy a calendar, just like your insurance agent, right, gives you that cheap little calendar with the kittens every year, right? Okay, in the same way, you can get one of those. You can get a Bible calendar if you want and hang it up. They're just not, used for commerce throughout the world, so they're kind of specific. Okay, good question. Now, let's keep going. What we're going to do is we're going to start by reading Matthew chapter 26. We're going to read 51 through 56. And then what we do is we go through the chapter a verse at a time. I'm going to ask you guys questions. We want to give the little kids up front an opportunity to answer those questions first. And then if you guys have questions at any time, just raise your hand, and I will stop periodically to see if anyone has any questions as we're teaching. Okay, so follow along with me, starting in verse 51. Forgive me, I am lost. Here we go. Okay, I found it. And behold, one of them which were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck a servant of the high priests and smote off his ear. Then said Jesus unto him, Put up again thy sword into his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Thinkest thou that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then shall the scriptures be fulfilled, that thus it must be? In that same hour said Jesus to the multitudes, Are ye come out as against a thief with swords and staffs for to take me? I sat daily with you teaching in the temple, and ye laid no hold on me. But all this was done that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples forsook him and fled. Starting in verse 51, it was Peter that drew the sword. We read Peter, it mentions that it was Peter in the book of John. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and smote the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. So what caused Peter to draw his sword and attempt to kill Malchus? Mark? They were, Read the prior verse. Amber? They laid hands on him. That was the line that Peter held. Malchus crossed that line. Now, we all know that Peter should not have used the sword at that time. But here's what I'm going to say about Peter. Good for Peter having a line. Christians should have a line that does not get crossed. In your life and in my life, we should have a line. Parents should have a line that does not get crossed. Kids, this is what we're doing. We're not crossing this line. This is not okay. This is wrong. We don't go over this line right here. That's what we're doing. Parents need to have a line. Fathers, especially, it is our job to draw a line and to hold that line. So I'm just going to go ahead and say this. If you never draw a line in the sand that your wife and kids do not like, then you are a lousy father. You're a lousy father and a lousy husband if you never draw a line in the sand that your wife and kids don't like. Now, obviously, the lines you draw, your kids are not going to like them a whole lot more. But do you understand that once in a while, we need to get together with our wife and say, hey, sweetie, we got to stop this. This is not okay. And, I'm reading the Bible and God's convicting me of this. And this is what we got to start doing. This is what's going to please God. And do you want to know something? Every single time we draw a line in the sand, our life, to some degree, is going to be a little bit more difficult, a little bit more uncomfortable. That's what happens when you draw a line. You ever hear those fools that say, oh, Christianity is a crutch? You're an idiot. That's the response. Christianity is a crutch. You're a moron. Try living my life for a day. You couldn't do it. The Christianity is a crutch crowd, they do whatever they want. They don't have any lines. They don't have any standards. They don't have any boundaries. They do whatever they want. We need to have lines in our life. That's what keeps us safe. Within these boundaries, we're safe. Within the boundaries set forth by this book, we are blessed, we are safe. That's a good place. In verse 52, I want to make sure we all understand that Jesus was not against owning a sword. Jesus actually commanded his disciples to go out and buy a sword. One of them said, well, I don't have the money. He said, go sell your clothes and buy a sword. That is Jesus telling us to be packing heat. Shepherds have to beat off the wolves. But this was not the time to use the sword. Jesus told Peter that you use your sword and you will have a sword used against you. Here in Luke chapter 22, starting in verse 50, and one of them smote the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. And Jesus answered and said, suffer ye thus far. And he touched his ear and healed him. Now, out of all the Gospels, this is the only one that talks about Jesus healing the ear. I don't know why, but Luke, what was his profession? He was a doctor, so I found that interesting. Okay, Jesus healing Malchus was saving Peter from arrest and punishment by the Jewish and or Roman authorities. He was saying, no, Peter, Peter clearly missed the point. What was Peter doing? Peter was trying to fight for the kingdom of God. And Jesus later says to Pilate, He says, none of my people are fighting for this kingdom because this kingdom is not here on earth. If my kingdom was here on earth, we'd all be fighting for it. Now, it's coming, but the day that the kingdom of God shows up, when Jesus is sitting on a throne, guess what? I'm not going to have to wave a sword. Or I will be very surprised if Jesus passes down the order to me, Patrick, get out your sword. I need your help. I do not see that happening. Peter was excited. He misunderstood the situation. What was Peter trying to stop? He was trying to stop the arrest of Messiah. And what we find is that Jesus explains, we can't stop this. This has to happen. In verse 53, we see Jesus explain that he can snap his fingers and get 12 legions of angels whenever he wants. We as Christians must remember Jesus commands us to proclaim the gospel and teach the Bible. Jesus never commands us to take up arms against the enemies of the gospel. Ever. We do not force people to become Christians. Now, Islam teaches its adherents to kill those who will not convert. Whenever we hear a talking head on TV about Islam, what do they always start with? They say, Islam is a religion of peace. That is two lies. Islam is not a religion, and it is not peaceful. Yep. There are over 120 verses in the Quran that call for fighting and killing anyone that opposes Allah being the one and only God and the Prophet Muhammad being his prophet. Allah is a demon, and Muhammad was buried in Medina, and he still is. They said he would rise from the dead. They buried him in a shallow grave. He never rose from the dead. The Quran says to make war, kill, crucify, and to cut off the hands and the feet of those that will not convert to Islam. While other religions say to take the lives of those who will not convert, Christianity teaches that we are to give our lives to those who will not convert. For anyone that wants to say that Islam is a peaceful religion, they are lying or they are ignorant. I own a Quran. I have read it. It is the worst written book on earth. And I have highlighted and marked every page where it talks about killing the infidels. Guess who's an infidel? Christians and Jews. Anyone that will not convert to Islam is an infidel. They say it again and again and again and again. The history of Islam has been slaughter. If you want to read a book, one of the greatest books I can recommend is this book by Bridget Gabrielle called Because They Hate. I've read it several times. Okay, I have traveled to listen to her speak. She grew up in Lebanon when Lebanon was a free and democratic country. Americans used to go over to Lebanon to go to college. It was considered the Paris, France of the Middle East. And Islam came in and took it over and killed everyone that was not in favor of Islamic rule. Lebanon is not even a country anymore. Okay, there is no stable government in Lebanon. It does not exist. It is gone. You have to read that book of what she went through as a child. Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, they are all the same. When Islam kicks out everyone who is not Islamic in the country, what do they do next? They start fighting amongst themselves, and this group says you have to obey and worship like us, and they kill this group of Muslims that does not. That is what they do. Anyone that tells you Islam is a religion of peace, you can just call them an ignorant liar right to their face immediately. You are in the right. They have no idea what they are talking about. You show me a peaceful Muslim, and I will show you a disobedient Muslim. Yes, Pam. Yep. Lying is not against their religion for the sake of promoting and progressing Islam. My point with bringing this up is that we are commanded to give our lives for those who are lost. Other religions command them to take the lives of those that will not adhere to their religion. We are commanded to go to any length and to give up our entire life in search of lost souls to bring them to Messiah. That is our mission. My point is, Peter misunderstood. In verse 54, what is Jesus talking about? Verse 54. In verse 53, Jesus says, Peter, if I needed, I could get 12 legions of angels down here like that. He said, but how then shall the scriptures be fulfilled? That thus it must be. Jesus is saying, look, things must happen that you guys don't want to see. For the scriptures to be fulfilled, I have to die. For the scriptures to be fulfilled, I must die a terrible death at the hands of my enemies. And if the scriptures were not fulfilled, then we would not have a Savior. We would have no way to go to heaven. Heaven would not be available to any of us if Jesus did not go to the cross. That's why he was telling Peter, no, put the sword up. This part has to happen. I have to be arrested. And he knew what was coming in the next 24 hours. In verse 55, Jesus asked them, why are you guys coming out here with weapons and torches? They did not need the weapons. Jesus would go willingly. Folks, when Abraham took Isaac up the mountain to sacrifice Isaac, how old was Isaac? We know that he had to be in his late teens. He could have been as much as his early 30s. That's the window that the Bible gives with the dates that we see. Now, when you see movies, when you see posters or cartoons or whatever, it's always like a little kid or a toddler being led up the mountain. Abraham put the wood on Isaac. He carried the wood up the mountain. Abraham was over 100 years old. What does that tell us? It tells us if Isaac didn't want to be sacrificed, he wasn't going to be sacrificed. Now, I am pretty confident that I could whoop any two of my sons at once right now.